Tonight on KQED Newsroom, coronavirus cases climb in California, bringing more uncertainty as the federal government grapples with a new virus relief package. Plus, the Santa Clara County District Attorney announces new criminal justice reforms. But will they be enough to address concerns over police misconduct in San Jose? And the crowds are gone, but sports lives on, how athletes are playing ball like never before. Welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Priya David Clemens. This weekend will mark 6 months since the first confirmed coronavirus case in California. There have now been more than 400,000 cases and 8,000 deaths in the state. This week, we've seen the highest number of new coronavirus cases in California and across the nation. In Washington, D.C., the Senate is working toward a new coronavirus relief package. The White House dropped its demand for a payroll tax cut, which GOP lawmakers had opposed. But big divisions remain as unemployment benefits are set to expire next week for 20 million people. Meanwhile, Democrats on Capitol Hill are championing a $3 trillion relief plan that includes aid for struggling states. Closer to home, Governor Gavin Newsom announced that on Tuesday, California recorded more than 12,000 new coronavirus cases, its highest daily total yet. California now has the most number of cases in the nation, surpassing New York. Joining us now by Skype from San Francisco to discuss this, our KQED politics and government correspondent, Marisa Lagos. Hello, Marisa.
Hi, Priya.
And with us by Skype from Palm Springs is KQED's senior editor of politics and government, Scott Schaefer. Hi, Scott.
Hello.
So let's start with the national picture. Marisa, I want to ask you, President Trump has canceled the Republican National Convention that was to be held in Jacksonville, citing that this was not the right time to bring so many people together. He also this week started encouraging people to wear face masks. Politically, what is behind this shift from his earlier message in which he had downplayed the severity of the virus for months?
I mean, I think it's poll numbers in politics. He's been getting pushback, and not just from, Democrats in blue states, but Republicans who are really scrambling to contain this virus. We saw with the Jacksonville decision, this was, of course, supposed to be in North Carolina. Officials there raised questions about the health concerns. They said, fine, we'll go to Florida, where Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican and big Trump supporter, is fine with this. But even the sheriffs there just didn't feel like they had the time to really make sure that they could provide the security and do this safely. And I think Trump is kind of looking around and realizing that as much as at the beginning of this, I think he and others tried to make things like masks a sort of red versus blue question, people are really concerned about their health and their jobs and the safety of their families.
Scott, the Senate made some incremental progress this week towards a new coronavirus relief package, but the benefits, the unemployment benefits that are linked to the former relief package are due to end next week. How important is it politically for the new package to be announced before the benefits from the old package run out?
Well, it's important, certainly to the people who are affected most directly, people who are unemployed. And there's also eviction protections that are expiring next week as well. The House passed a bill, the HEROES Act, in May with $3 trillion in it. That includes an extension of those benefits for the unemployed. But there's a lot of disagreement within the Republican caucus and with President Trump and the Republicans. So they are having a hard time deciding what to put in the package, how big it should be. Mitch McConnell is saying it should be no more than $1 trillion. But even some Republicans are saying that's too big. They also, the president wanted to initially cut back on money for testing, also wanted a payroll tax deduction. The Republicans pushed back on that. So there's a lot of disagreement within the Republican caucus, and I think they have to get that worked out. But in the meantime, there are real people who are going to be affected by the expiration of these benefits.
And so, Scott, just to follow up on that, do you think we will see a new relief package announced next week?
I think we will. There is a lot of pressure on people on both sides. I mean, the House is going to have to compromise as well. I mean, Democrats were united. I think it was a unanimous vote in the House back in May, but they're going to have to give. And Nancy Pelosi is no stranger to compromise. She knows how to do that. But I think that especially on the Republicans and the president, because we're seeing unemployment applications continuing to be above 1 million a week. So there is a lot of pressure, and the pain will really start to be felt, and that's when the pressure will increase.
Marisa, despite the pandemic, both Democrats and Republicans have been coming out and voting in the presidential primaries or casting absentee ballots, and fundraising has been going very well for both parties as well. Vice President Joe Biden is leading in the polls nationally right now. What does he need to do to keep up his momentum? And conversely, what could Trump do to break his stride?
I mean, I think there's a couple things here. It's not surprising at this moment that you see this deficit. I think we saw similar polls in 2016. So none of the Democrats I'm speaking to think that these numbers will necessarily hold, that this lead that he has established nationally and perhaps more importantly in many swing states it will narrow sort of by virtue of people kind of shuffling into where the buckets they might already kind of be leaning towards as this approaches. I think Biden, is going to make a lot of news when he announces a VP pick. I think that he has been rolling out really detailed policy proposals and actually getting some attention for that. So I think their campaign feels like they're on a good road and they just need to kind of keep pushing it forward. I mean, for Trump, as we discussed at the top, I think there's this question of the pandemic and whether he can sort of demonstrate to voters who do not feel like he is handling this well, that he is taking it seriously and is trying to stem the tide. Interestingly, polls still show overwhelmingly that despite all of this, voters do really trust Trump with the economy. And so I think that that's going to become a kind of key question, is that link between the pandemic and the economy and how well both men can kind of use that to define their argument to voters.
Scott, Marisa just mentioned the vice president pick. So Biden is expected to announce sometime around August 1st his pick for the vice president. You and Marisa talked with one person on that short list this week, Congressmember Karen Bass. Can you tell us a little bit more about who she is and what her odds are?
Sure. She's really a late entry into the VP stakes, I would say. Her name really hadn't surfaced until George Floyd was killed. She's the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and she has been working on police reform issues for decades, really going all the way back to Los Angeles after the Rodney King riots. So she has some street cred on that. She's popular with both the progressives, who really like her, as well as more moderate, even Republicans. Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader, worked with Karen Bass when she was Assembly Speaker up in Sacramento in around 2008, says that she is his favorite Democrat. I'm not sure that helps her, but the point is she's able to work with different groups of people. She's she has an easy manner. She laughs easily. She's very smart and knows policy. She also has a healthcare background, which is very important, or could be in this moment when we're dealing with a pandemic. But she's also up against Kamala Harris, who many feel has been at the very top of the list from the beginning. So they're in the process now of vetting the candidates, going through things like income taxes, their spouses' income taxes, their health records, siblings. They just do, it's a complete, 360 review. And in the end, I think it's going to come down to who's Biden most comfortable with. Who does he think he can govern with? Because it does look like he has a pretty good chance of winning.
Marisa, this has been a tough week, another tough week for California. We've had more coronavirus cases than we've ever had before. There are more hospitalizations, more deaths. And I'm curious, will Governor Gavin Newsom be paying a political price for these increases in pandemic numbers here?
I mean, I think he already is in sort of the world of punditry. There's a lot of questions about whether he bowed too soon to pressure to reopen certain sectors of the economy earlier this summer. I think a lot of the anger around people who feel he went too fast is now really centering around schools and the fact that we can't send our kids back, and kind of what does that mean more broadly, not just for their education and, equity within our system, but also for parents and how they can work and get this economy going. The good news for Newsom is he's not on the ballot for another couple of years. I think that he is going to continue to kind of walk this line with the feds in terms of, hitting Trump maybe on the campaign trail a little bit more. But he has tried to work with that administration. And I do think a lot of the criticisms, the strongest critics are people who already opposed him.
Okay. And Scott, California has 12 significant measures on the ballot this November. I want to just dive into a couple that touch housing. One is an effort to pare back Proposition 13, and another is an effort to expand rent control. How likely are these to pass?
Well, they're both going to attract a lot of money on both sides. The rent control measure, voters rejected it pretty resoundingly a few years ago, and it's going to be an uphill climb again. The other one is going to it's going to increase property taxes on commercial properties. Labor is putting a lot of money into it, and as you can imagine, property owners and commercial Chamber of Commerce, Business Roundtable, they're going to put a lot of money to defeat it. So it's going to be a battle royal, and it'll be close, I'm sure.
Scott Schaefer and Marisa Lagos with KQED, thank you both so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
The national reckoning over racial injustice and police misconduct has reverberated through society and sharpened demands for criminal justice reforms nationally and locally. This week, the Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen announced he would no longer seek the death penalty. He also announced the creation of a new board for greater public oversight into police misconduct. But some, including Santa Clara County Public Defender Molly O'Neill, argue that more needs to be done to change the culture of policing. Last month, a blog post on Medium revealed racist and anti-Muslim posts made by current and former San Jose police officers on Facebook. Joining me now by Skype from San Jose, our Santa Clara County District Attorney, Jeff Rosen. Hello, Jeff.
Hello.
And Molly O'Neill, the Santa Clara County Public Defender. Hello, Molly.
Hi, Priya.
Jeff, as recently as a year ago, you publicly supported the death penalty. What led you to this change of policy and change of heart?
A few things. My thinking about the death penalty has evolved, and some things that were very impactful. I visited the Equal Justice Initiative's Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, very recently with a church group and a synagogue group, and also the National Lynching Memorial, and was incredibly moved by those experiences and what I learned about the history and legacy of slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and mass incarceration. And then the last several months, all of the attention and focus on law enforcement in our society and the righteous calls of protest. And I was very moved by and really devastated by the murder of George Floyd. And I had a visceral reaction when I saw that. And the reaction I had was, I'm not seeking the death penalty anymore. I don't think that I have the moral authority or our society has the moral authority given the systemic racism that's in every aspect of our society, which is then reflected in our criminal justice system. And so I said, I'm not seeking the death penalty anymore.
Molly, you support this change. Could you tell us why you think it's so important?
It's huge, and I really applaud our district attorney for making this move. The death penalty has always been a racist killing machine, and it's been applied disproportionately always. And it's been a slow movement in the country to abolish it, and this is a good step in that direction.
Jeff, you also announced other criminal justice reforms in Santa Clara County this week. Could you take us through one or two highlights?
Sure. I think a big one is that when we file criminal charges, we're going to ask ourselves, what should we prove, not what can we prove? And those are two very different things. And so we're going to look at our charging decisions, what sentencing enhancements to charge or not charge through the lens of race and equity, and ask what should we charge, not what can we charge. I think another significant reform that is really on the other end of the spectrum in terms of seriousness of crimes is we're not going to charge driving on a suspended license for failure to pay fines and fees as a misdemeanor. We're going to charge that as an infraction in traffic court. That's 4,000 cases a year. That's about 10% of the cases we prosecute. And this is a way of keeping people out of the criminal justice system and not building up a criminal record. And it's a way of not penalizing poor people who get these offenses.
And I know you're also not going to be going after standalone charges for resisting arrest. Molly, will any of these reforms make a significant difference in how your office conducts its business?
Well, I applaud all of the reforms, and particularly the standalone 148s. We've spent decades dealing with cases where our clients tell us they were pulled over for no apparent reason. They were stopped in their own neighborhood. If they were an African-American client of ours who lives in Palo Alto. And so that's a really important move. As I understand it, there are roughly 450 to 500 cases like that a year. So that will remove the huge fight around those cases. So that's a very big deal. The other reform announced that I really applaud is the decision not to attach gang enhancements to misdemeanor cases. Those gang enhancements were almost always attached to cases of communities of color, for Latinx clients and Black clients. And so that's a big deal, and I would like to see further discussion, and we are engaged in that discussion with the district attorney's office about the use of gang enhancements at all. So big news.
Jeff, the San Jose Police Officers Association is strongly critical of these reform measures. How do you respond to their assertions that these changes will make it harder for officers to do their job?
I've been a prosecutor for 25 years, and I've worked closely with police officers for all of my professional life. I have great respect and admiration for the work that police officers do, and think that in our county, the vast majority of police officers we have are excellent. But there is no organization that is perfect, and I view the reforms that I'm putting forward, specifically as they relate to police oversight, as a way of helping police departments weed out bad officers and helping the good officers in those departments become great officers who become guardians and protectors of our community. So I view the reforms I'm making as a way of increasing trust between the community and law enforcement, which is ultimately what will make all of us, including police officers, safer.
And some of that trust was broken recently with the news about racist comments that were made by some San Jose police officers on Facebook. 4 officers have been placed on leave following the discovery of discriminatory statements against Muslims and Black Lives Matter that were made in this Facebook group. Molly, do you think that this is a case of a few bad apples, or do you think racism runs widely through the San Jose Police Department?
You know, I think that there are plenty of good men and women who serve as police officers in communities all across California. But I do not think this was an isolated incident. And we had not only active officers, active duty officers, but retired officers participating in these posts, which included comments about Black lives don't really matter and pulling hijabs over Muslim women's faces. So I don't believe that's isolated, and I think part of the deep-rooted issue is that there's a code of silence. So if you're a good cop and you know that bad cops are making racist comments, you're pretty much silenced, and that's the culture that I believe really has to change, must change, and we are at that point in time where there is momentum to not just make small changes to the criminal justice system, but to make huge ones. And that's a fundamental part of that.
And yet you haven't joined this call nationally that we've heard to defund the police. Why not?
I wouldn't say that I'm not in the defund the police camp. I would say I don't like the language, because different people use the language differently, and until we have a clear meaning of what we're talking about, I think it's used too widely. What I would say is that I am very much in favor of repurposing some of the funding that currently goes to the police and putting it to better use. So, for example, the money that pays for internal affairs, I think that money should be repurposed. Money that pays for officers on campus, I think officers on campus don't make campuses safer, and that money should be repurposed. Also, money that's used for mental health response isn't best used that way. So my thinking is that we really should take a good hard look at how taxpayer dollars are used to fund the police and repurpose.
All right, Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen and Santa Clara County Public Defender Molly O'Neill, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
This week, Major League Baseball began its shortened and delayed regular season. The Oakland Athletics will play their opening game against the Los Angeles Angels at Ring Central Coliseum tonight. But new rules and protocols are making this a season unlike any other for fans and players alike. Stadiums across the country are closed to the public to help lower the spread of the coronavirus. Some MLB teams, including the A's, made cardboard cutouts of loyal fans and some pets to bring a familiar face or two along for the highly unusual start of the season. With me now by Skype is the host of the Mark Willard Show on KNBR, Mark Willard. Mark, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So this is certainly a season unlike any other. Only 60 games, multiple rule changes, and expanded playoffs. How well do you expect this all to work?
Well, look, they're off to a good start. I can say that certainly there were a lot of people who did not even think we would get to this day. where the season starts. But it's an evolving challenge that will continue. They've crossed a lot of bridges, but now everybody's got to get on planes. And you never know what's going to happen on a day-to-day basis. One of the best players in the game with the Washington Nationals, Juan Soto, on opening night, all of a sudden tested positive for COVID-19, and he was completely asymptomatic, didn't see it coming, doesn't know where he got it. And so that's something that every team is going to have to deal with. And then there's this moving line of what's too much, what's too dangerous. But so far, so good in terms of the percent of positives that they've gotten within all of these baseball camps. It's been very, very low. So they've done a good job. It's hovering right around 1%. So I think they're off to the start that they wanted.
So in addition to folks like Juan Soto, who might get sick, there are other baseball players who have opted out of playing this season, like San Francisco Giants catcher and former MVP Buster Posey. How much of an impact will the absence of some of these big names have on the game and also on fans and morale?
Sure. I think for fans, they'll be missing something, but fans are different right now than they've ever been. I mean, fans right now are just glad that there's something there and that welcome distraction is there. So you're looking at a pretty low bar, I think, in terms of gathering fan interest and entertaining people and whatnot. I think there's something emotional that is certainly lost. I don't know if fans are going to look at this season as a real season. Whoever wins the championship, is that a real champion? Little stuff like that, because there are big name players and such a small sample of games that are going to be played. But as I said, I think we're not looking at a very picky audience right now, so everybody's willing to deal with whatever they get.
Mark, I'm curious about some of the changes that have been made, like the cardboard cutouts and the crowd sounds that are being played. A ball that's hit into the stands and there's no one there to catch it. It's just going to roll and roll and roll. The changes like the cardboard cutouts and the sounds, are those being made for the players to feel more like it usually is, or are those being made for the TV audiences?
I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, to be honest, the cardboard cutouts are there because the owners are looking for a way to recoup some of the dollars that they're losing because fans aren't in the stands. But there are things that are absolutely there in order to make the players feel at home and make the television audience feel at home. I think pumped in fake crowd noise, when you say that, the main reaction is, that sounds gimmicky. We don't want that. But when you actually sit down and watch the game, for the most part, they've done a pretty good job. I mean, it is interesting. You don't necessarily feel like these players are in this cavernous, open, empty stadium. So you understand why they've done it, certainly for the television audience, and it does go for the players as well, as they try to make them at least feel some sort of normalcy.
And let's turn to Gabe Kapler, who made history as the first MLB manager to take a knee during the national anthem beside a few of his players. And that's received both praise and criticism. Do you see this trend of players and coaches kneeling continuing through the season? And how do you see fans reacting?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think the fan reaction will be predictable, as you just said. Just like what mirrors our nation, you're going to have a lot of people on both sides of the fence and some people who have a hard time understanding what this is really all about at its core. However, I'd also say if there's going to be a team and a market that kind of takes the lead on this, it is kind of appropriate that it's the San Francisco Giants. And I think that more fans than not actually are accepting Gabe Kapler in a way they never have before. I mean, until last night, he had never managed a game, an actual game for the Giants before. And so fans hadn't really gotten to get to know him. But through this process, they are a little bit. And he had parents who were activists. This is not something I don't think that's inauthentic. It's real. I think it speaks to a good portion of the fan base. And so I definitely think from his standpoint and others with the Giants, it will continue. And as we've seen through all sports throughout the last 4 or 5 years, once one barrier breaks down, then more continue to break down, and the invitation seems open to more. So yeah, I would expect this to continue.
And another barrier that was broken down was that Alyssa Nakken appeared on the preseason as a first-base coach, and she's the first woman in MLB history to do this. Do you see it happening during the regular season, and will that open the field up?
Yeah, maybe not this year, but yes, the short answer is I definitely see this continuing, because again, this is just yet another barrier that I think the San Francisco Giants are proud of. And so Alyssa's she just turned 30 years old. She's been in the organization for 5 years. She's worn a number of hats within the organization. But it was just over the last few months that this sort of spilled into her actually being on the coaching staff. And the Giants' current staff is a very forward-thinking, evolved type of a group. And I think, again, they welcome this. They want to be the group that makes people look at things from a different angle. And so that is absolutely going to open the door. I recently asked Alyssa, where is this going? What do you want to manage someday? She might have stopped short of saying yes, but she said that's very, very attractive. She's very smart. She's a very, very good representative here, if you will, for this movement. And so I absolutely seeing it opening doors and more of this to come.
Okay, Mark, let's turn to other sports now. Basketball is going to start next week. Hockey is going to start August 1st. And football? Where do we stand on all of those?
Well, basketball and hockey are doing a little bit more of a bubble format, which in theory allows them, if you can keep the virus out of the bubble, you have a pretty safe environment, even though those are contact sports. So far, so good. The numbers have been good coming out of those two spots. As we mentioned, baseball is now getting on airplanes. And so to me, that's the biggest challenge. But the biggest of them all clearly sits with the NFL, which is trying to open training camps here pretty soon, and they want business as usual. So if they're getting on planes, combined with the contact nature of their sport and the linemen breathing on one another right there, right before every play, that's the sport that's got the biggest challenges of them all right now.
All right, Mark Willard with KNBR, thanks so much.
Thank you.
You can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/kqed-newsroom. I'm Priya David Clemens. You can reach me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Priya D. Clemens. From all of us here at KQED, thanks for watching. Good night.